People in charge of hiring, what's the worst way you've seen an applicant frick up a job interview? I asked the candidate if he considered himself a punctual person. He responded with, well, I'm not a grammar Nazi or anything. That's freaking hilarious. Was on a panel where the applicant was clear favorite for the spot, answered every question excellently, until this. How many breaks do I get? Me. 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon and your lunch. Well, that needs to change. I'm on a strict diet and exercise regimen and need a 15-minute break every hour so that I can eat. Me. On doctor's orders? No. I want to compete in bodybuilding next summer. Me. Thanks for your time. We'll be in touch. Pretty sure that was Chris Traeger you didn't hire. I was interviewing an older, probably in his early to mid 60s, grandfatherly man for a position as a caregiver to individuals with developmental disabilities, and the man was an absolute perfect fit according to his resume. The only problem was that every other word out of his mouth was either frick or B. So, my B and I went to the fricking Garden of the Gods last week and we had a great fricking time. Those rocks were fricking huge. I kind of have a feeling that he nuked the interview on purpose to keep on unemployment until retirement kicked in. Garden of the Gods is pretty fricking awesome though. Brought his mom in with him, who answered the questions I was asking him until I asked her wait outside. His only work experience was paper route he kept for less than 2 months and mowing his neighbor's lawn. It was clearly an enormous effort for this poor guy to communicate in anything but one-word answers. He looked genuinely relieved when the interview was over. Dude was 22 years old. Forget helicopter parenting. That's Air Force parenting. Had an applicant that was probably 17 show up with his girlfriend. They sat and held hands waiting for him to be called in. When I went out to meet him, he asked if she could come in too. Number. No, she can't. To clarify, he wanted to bring her into the interview room. They were both already waiting together in the building. I had a female Indian candidate for a programming position that spoke perfect English during the phone interview. Brought her in for the face-to-face interview the next week where she barely understood English, had a very different Hindi accent and really didn't meet the minimum job requirements. I decided she was a no-go 5 minutes into a 30-minute interview. During our talk, I found out her husband paid someone else to do the phone part just so we would bring her in person. We interviewed a girl for a job, and it really went well. We decided to call her previous employers and references to see about her past. Her most recent employer, in which she resigned from for personal reasons, informed us that they fired her because she got busted for selling M at work. We decided to file her application in the special file cabinet. I'm a chef, hiring a line cook. The interview is going fine. All I want is a hard worker who likes food, drugs, booze, don't give a crap. As long as you can work and love food. Get to the last question. Me. Okay, so what's your favorite food? Her. I don't know. Chicken. Me. I love chicken. Fried chicken. Roast chicken. A seared chicken breast on the grill. Chicken is awesome. What's your favorite way to prepare it? Her. Oh, I don't know how to cook chicken. I like chicken nuggets a lot though. Nope. Oh, I don't know how to cook chicken. Clearly qualified to work as a cook. Last week we were interviewing a potential new hire who clearly had absolutely no idea what our company the job was about. Like, hadn't even googled us. Had no idea what she wanted to do there. And told us that she wanted to go into our business because other things she looked at were too hard to do. And too much energy, so this company seemed like a good fit. UHH. Okay, I told her I didn't think she'd be a good fit for the position. And she tried to argue with me, saying that she didn't know what the job was about but she was sure she could do it and that it wasn't fair that we would turn her down when the position was open and we needed somebody. And she showed up for the interview. So she should have the job. I know. She was a disaster. I had a guy turn in a fairly impressive resume, so I hauled him in to lay eyes on him and test his chops. It was an entry-level engineering gig, which frankly he was overqualified for. When he came in I started asking about his education, how he decided on a concentration, which aspects he found the most connection with, etc. Turns out, he never went to college at all. He felt his resume should reflect his intended path in equal measure with his actual achievements. Engineering is something I've always felt I had an aptitude for, and besides, How much can you learn from an actual book? Am I right? GTFO. Dong. I should have billed his butt for wasting my time. Once saw the guy doing a quick forklift driving test as part of an interview. He gets on, hits the acceleration a tad too hard, and tears a chunk out of the wall near the boss's office. Guy gets off, sighs, looks at the interviewer, and says, "No chance, right? It's like falling and sliding into the wall after fricking up a triple axle. Just grab your coat, say thank you, and try again somewhere else. Or you could go with a bold strategy. Act shocked, look at the forklift, point at one of the parts, and explain how the part is in violation of code 1824.7. Be offended. Say things like, I could have been killed." Guy shows up to interview looking like he just rolled out of bed, then has a terrible attitude during the interview, blows off questions, clearly thinks he's being clever by calling out questions that are more about how you answer than the actual answer. When the interview is over, he straight up asks when he starts. Apparently he thought he already had the job, thought he was here to fill out paperwork, which raises the question, even if you thought you already had the job, why would you still put no effort into your appearance and act like a jackass? Graduate student interviewing for a highly competitive part-time teaching position waltzes in wearing a dirty t-shirt. He informs us, the 5-person hiring committee, 2 faculty, 3 graduate students, that he would probably not miss too many scheduled class meetings and exhibited a terrible attitude toward teaching. I stopped the scheduled 30-minute interview after 15 minutes because we had better things to do with our time. He seemed genuinely surprised his interview was so brief. I always have to wonder if this sort of person is aware that they are performing poorly and just expect you to remain professional, or if they think that they are nailing the interview, or just aren't interested in the position, but want to at least be able to say that they tried for it. 1. Guy threw a beer can in the trash can before coming into the interview. When asked about it he said, it was just one drink. To take the edge off, did not get job. 2. Applicant said it was having sex with a H in the employee break room that got him fired from his last job, and he didn't see anything wrong with that. Came in smelling of old laundry, unshaven, not just beard, I mean unkempt and scraggly. Had no answer for why he wanted to work with us. In speaking, had a different degree than the one he had put down on his resume. Had written a policy degree. In speaking, he had a criminology degree. The sad part was, we were really excited about the candidate until then. Even on the phone. Never seen someone bomb an interview quite that badly. To be fair, my degree is in policy, but criminal justice was one of my focus areas. Many who came into my program later had to pick just one focus and criminal justice was one. I can tell you I fricked up an interview last week by suddenly getting a stutter and going blank on every question that was asked of me. Just for your information for your next interview, nervousness is normal in an interview and it does not reflect badly on yourself at all to pause to think over a question or reset if you find yourself stuttering or talking too fast. A guy was about to get the job, then the receptionist came in with a story about how he was vaping in the reception area. When the receptionist stared at him and looked at the no smoking sign, he gave her a big grin and blew a big vape. The thing is, my boss hates vaping. He calls it tobacco juice no matter how many times I explain it to him. The guy lost the job. Forget hating vaping, that guy was being a douche. So, tell us about yourself a bit. I've always taken that question to mean where did you go to college? What have you been doing since college? What are your general goals? Not this candidate. He proceeded to tell us his life story, taking 25-30 minutes out of what was supposed to be a 40-minute interview. Tops. Our team did not need to know anything about his childhood, much less 20 minutes worth. He was not brought back for a second interview. It must have been one heck of a story if you let him talk for that long. I hired him and sent him to the secretary to do all the paperwork. On the way from my office to hers, separate buildings, he got high and stunk like weed when he walked in and then proceeded to sexually harass her. I was actually really afraid this would put my job in danger for hiring this guy. Luckily the secretary wasn't too upset by it and now it's just an ongoing joke whenever I hire someone. Still pretty embarrassing for me. I've been hiring for a distribution center for about 6 months. I've been asked out multiple times when I ask if they have any questions. I will automatically reject that application. So dumb. Because you want to date them and there is a rule against employees dating. Got it. Nice. I had a guy set up for an interview on a Wednesday. 5 minutes after the interview should have started, he called TK reschedule. We rescheduled for Friday. At the time his interview should have started, he called for instructions to our office, so I gave him the address and the nearest intersection. To no one's surprise, he does not show up. The next Friday he called to reschedule again. I politely declined. I've done literally hundreds of technical interviews. While most people fail due to the lack of knowledge, some fail in spectacular ways because of poor judgment, lack of self-control, bad personality, etc. I remember a few cases. I remember this guy who was very self-confident. I started asking easy questions and he would scoff at me but answer them. I almost immediately realized I was boring him and moved on to the intermediate questions. At that point, he'd scoff and roll his eyes, really, at every question, as if it was miles beneath him. The problem is that he would bungle the answer horribly, and when questioned about it, he'd start arguing with me that his answer was right and I was wrong. This went on for a long time, and I was being very careful not to corner him with my counter arguments, afraid a scene would ensue. I later learned that on the second part of the interview, he lost it with the interviewer and said he truly didn't know why he was applying for the job, that all the questions were stupid and all people interviewing him were so bad they couldn't even fully understand his answers. Don't need to say he never got hired. There was also this time I worked for an Israeli company and two of us, a Jewish Orthodox co-worker and I, had this candidate to interview in the US. After the first 5 minutes of the interview, it was clear to us that the guy didn't know crap. Big company rule said interviews had to last at least 30 minutes, so we pressed on. The guy, looking at my religious co-worker, started to say, "Hey, remember, my last name is," obviously Jewish last name, between every question in an attempt to grab the position by influence. My teammate and I would exchange looks every time it happened. At the end, we were disgusted with the whole experience. Guy never got hired. And last but not least, there was this candidate who would stop talking every time a relatively good-looking girl walked around the office. He would stop talking for a few seconds, until they got out of sight, and then resume the answer as if nothing had happened. No job for you, mister. Not even to the interview portion, but I've seen someone attach their recipes file instead of resume to an online application. I had a guy show up for his interview drunk, wearing a powder blue tuxedo jacket. The interview didn't last long, but before it was over he was crying about his uncle who had died. We asked him how long he had been gone. 6 years. Had a woman show up with her 6 kids. They ran around the lobby screaming and yelling the entire time my boss interviewed her. Afterwards she demanded that we let her kids use the bathroom, which was for employees only, since she obviously nailed that crap. I accidentally brought my daughter to an interview. I went in just to get an application to take home. Manager told me that I could grab a high chair and fill it out at the restaurant. I filled it out, gave it back, and she interviewed me with my little one there. I got the job. I was once doing some semi-casual interviews and was speaking to a lady who was super suspicious of everything, and eventually said something to the effect of, "You're reading from a script, this is a scam," and then hung up. And I was like, okay then, sure, guess you don't want a job. I mean, I get it, you can be skeptical and all, but if you're going to waste my time calling in and going through the motions, at least don't be a standoffish dingus about it the whole time. I did once interview for a company that ended up being a massive scam. They hired me on the spot. I just had to pay for my training that would be paid back in my first month of work. It did leave me very skeptical for any interview I had after that in that period, which was very annoying, so I can understand her viewpoint. Dumbest thing I ever did was answer my phone at 7 AM after working a night shift for a job I definitely would have taken. I decided to go through with the phone interview. Idiot. I had a male candidate direct all his answers to my HR colleague. Male. I'm female. I was not the hiring manager, but I would have been this guy's direct manager, and that was outlined at the beginning of the interview. He even directed answers to questions I asked of the male HR dude. Another story, not hiring. but firing. A few months ago, I had to let a person go after the mandatory 3 written warnings, performance management etc. So it should have been no surprise to him when the death knell came. So we organized the meeting, and I have same HR business partner there, and I'm outlining the reason for the meeting and took him through the reasoning and then explained that today would be his last day, and he looked at the HR dude and said, "Is she serious?" Grah, yes, you freaking moron, I'm serious. Awful. I got a job at Home Depot. I had a female co-worker in my department that I was shadowing. Awesome lady, very knowledgeable, became a friend outside work. The first day when I didn't know product or anything, we had several guys come up with questions. They'd ask me, she'd answer. They'd ask me again, she'd answer. After a while it was like, frick dude, ask her, I don't know crap yet. I went to an interview. Funny thing is, on my way, I got knocked by a big metal parking bar which I didn't see, who struck me down on the ground, hit me right in the chest, could not breathe for 20 minutes. I miserably crawled to the interview, panting, and spoke with the guy feeling half dead. Then after the interview, went to the emergencies. 1 week later, I was told I got the job. I used to work for a law firm, and one day a girl came in for an interview wearing jeans, tank top, and thin sandals. She was slouched down in her seat the entire time during the interview. She actually seemed really smart, just a little out of touch with reality. Interviewing for a director of nursing position. The candidate absolutely knocked the phone interview out of the park. She was exactly what we were looking for. At the end of phone interviews, I always remind candidates about what to have prepared for their in-person interview. Obvious stuff. Have multiple copies of your resume. Dress appropriately. No jewelry or perfume. The usual. She was friendly, and we joked a bit about how on earth some people show up to interviews looking inappropriate. When she showed up for her in-person interview, she was drunk. Her knee-high stockings were rolling down. Her dress was above her knees anyway. She should have been wearing regular pantyhose, and reeked of cigarette smoke. TLDR. I will never again underestimate how completely oblivious people are to their own faults. Former staffing recruiter from Idaho here. Don't get me wrong, I love Idaho and have lived here most of my life, but we have some serious rednecks here. I called and set up an interview with this guy a few days out and immediately regretted it. I had to explain to him exactly what a temp agency is and exactly where we were located. He was living almost an hour away from our office. So about 15 minutes before his interview, I get a phone call from his wife, who at the time I thought was his 9-year-old son, and she's trying to figure out where to go. I'm on the phone with them trying to be polite, and all of a sudden I hear her say, "Why are you turning into the gas station?" Which he replies with, "I have to take a freaking leak." Then she responds with, "We are already late then." Without missing a beat he says, "So that means I can't take a motherfucking pee?" God freaking dang. They finally arrived 10 minutes late and they are dressed like they just walked out of a trailer trash convention. I call him back to interview him and his wife comes with him, and I have to politely say, "This is a private interview. I'm sorry, but you'll have to wait in the lobby." So she responds with, "So does that mean I can't be in here?" Long story short, he wasn't qualified for any of the jobs I had open and wouldn't stop calling me once a week for over 2 months. A girl I was interviewing had her phone on the table. During the middle of the interview it rang and she answered it. She freaking answered the phone and looked me in the eyes to tell the other person they were in a job interview. I just asked one more question, which was, "Do you have any further questions for me?" To which the reply was, "I didn't get the job, did I?" I once had an applicant show up half an hour late to a midday interview in a sweaty, smelly leather leotard, high heels, and visibly unwashed hair. She insisted that she wanted the job, but only for a few months because she liked to jump around from job to job so she wouldn't get bored. I was not impressed. Interviewee: I just got out of jail. It was nothing serious, I just beat my girlfriend. Sometimes you have to smack a bee, you know what I mean. Me: okay, well, have a good day. The application says, "Have you ever been convicted of a felony?" Answering yes will not automatically disqualify you. And they wrote, "I will explain in my interview. We aren't allowed to ask about it at all." That's all they wanted to talk about. As a senior in high school, I worked as an assistant manager of a pet store. The general manager left early one day and, about 45 minutes after his departure, a young woman came in claiming she was there for an interview. I called my GM and asked him if he had forgotten about the interview, to which he informed me that it had been scheduled for 3 hours prior. He thought she had blown the interview off. He told me to tell her to come back tomorrow at the same time and he'd give her another shot. I relayed the message and she said okay, seemingly disaffected by the message. She sat there, in the front of the store on a stacked display of dog food, for 2 hours. Every time I asked her if she was alright, she told me she was waiting on her ride. This girl was a mess. She looked like the offspring of a human and a Vietnamese potbelly pig. Her forehead was fat, not big like Rihanna or Christina Ricci. Fat. It actually drooped over her eyebrow ridge and punctuated every expression she made with an air of sluggishness. My manager called back and I let him know the girl was still sitting in the store. He told me to go into the office and grab the corporate binder that had contained the boilerplate interview questions. If she seemed like she wasn't an absolute mongoloid, he'd follow up the next day with a brief phone interview. Long story short, here are some brief snippets of things she said and did in the interview. Admitted she did not have a car and had no real plan for how she would be getting to work. When I suggested a bus, she reacted like she had not even considered it. Oh, yeah, that would work. Admitted she didn't like animals and didn't really want to handle any, but she would if we forced her. We went around a couple times after I explained that no one would force her to do anything. She wasn't indentured. Answered her cell phone during the interview. Apparently her ride had finally showed up, and I don't know why this one sticks with me so much. Asked no fewer than a dozen questions about guinea pigs. Are those dogs? Why do they call them pigs? So they aren't pigs? Are they like rabbits? So they're like really big hamsters? Why do they live in those little igloos? Why does that one have curly hair but the other one doesn't? That is probably the saddest case of generic stupidity I've heard in a while. I'm always amazed when I hire a kid, high school kids typically, after the interview goes average fairly well, only to have the parent, call and ask me about stuff like scheduling and general questions that any kid should be able to call their employer about. The crap is ridiculous. Parents, stop doing this crap. It seriously makes me hate your kid. My mum did that and my new boss told me that he nearly didn't hire me because of it. I work at PetSmart. And one of the questions is if you could be any animal, what would it be? He said he would be a turtle because he is always really slow and he's never in a rush. I would be a panda, lazy, loner, spend most of my life eating, and very little contact with the opposite sex. We had a candidate who brought his wife to the interview. We had no idea because he left her to hang out on the first floor of the building. This was a multi-floor office building with shops and stuff on the first floor. About 1/2 hour into the interview she came up to our lobby, announced she was bored and asked us to cut the interview short so he could drive her home. This was for a pretty high level management type position. We were appalled. He did not get the job. I was hiring for a database programmer who would work closely with other programmers and the business people to design and implement software. I selected one particular application for an interview because she seemed to have a lot of experience and had a good cover letter. The applicant showed up and was able to speak only very rudimentary courtesy phrases in English. Otherwise she spoke Chinese. She brought us a letter from her translator explaining that he had done her resume and cover letter for her, and that she comes with superb references from China. Nobody else in the organization spoke Chinese. The job description required excellent communication skills. I've done some interesting interviews. Our positions are usually technical in nature, which means we do tend to get some candidates with unusual personalities. On paper the people we interview always look well qualified, but sometimes they get a little bit of help writing their resume, and sometimes the words on the paper just can't impart the full glory of their weirdness. One guy turned up and was full on Rain Man autistic, but fat. As we call him to the interview room and he stands up, the bucket seat he's been sat in comes with him, firmly attached to his posterior, which is wedged firmly into it. He won't take off his motorcycle anorak for the whole interview. He came on the train, not a motorcycle, and consequently he is sweating profusely throughout. Anytime we ask him a question that he isn't expecting, that is, most of them, he puts his head on the table, face down, and just sits in silence for an uncomfortable amount of time. Rephrasing the question seems to draw a bit more out of him, but there's a lot of really awkward silences. At one point he gets particularly stressed and starts making a high-pitched buzzing noise. Another guy, Q. How would your friends describe you? A. I don't have any friends. Pause. I have a brother. Q. Okay. How would your brother describe you? A. Weird. Another guy answered the same question with the word twisted. Another guy told us he'd really rather be a builder, because he was a builder once, and he really enjoyed it and the money was better. Another guy interviewed okay. We'd asked all our questions, given him an opportunity to ask any he had, and just wrapping up. Suddenly he interjects. No, 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 we are not finished yet. He launches into a monologue about how great he is and why we simply must employ him. As he draws to a close and we are breathing a sigh of relief, he then pulls out 2 sheets of paper and starts reading the list of 50 or so questions he's written down, most of which we've already covered. A question we sometimes use involves planning a response to an impending emergency. One recent female applicant decided that it was the morally correct thing to do to leave the most elderly, disabled and vulnerable people behind to die in the impending tidal wave because it would take additional effort and money to take them to safety and they don't contribute anything to society. Another girl spent 5 minutes telling us with an impressively oblivious level of pride about the illegal marketing activities she had been coordinating at her current place of work. Perhaps I just attract interesting people. He called me from a very noisy Starbucks, didn't have a pencil, paper, or computer on him, didn't want to reschedule, couldn't answer any technical question I asked him, and then asked to end the phone screen early so he could go see a movie. He still sends me updates to his resume from time to time. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.